The legend did not start with a trophy. It started with a wake-up call. Before the 2000 season, Shaq admitted he partied, coasted, and let moments slip. Phil Jackson walked in with rings and rules, and the big man chose to be coached. Montana talks turned into a pact. Trim down, lock in, dominate on both ends. The Lakers would not just play through Shaq, they would orbit him. What followed was not a good season. It was a takeover that rewired the league. From training camp to the last confetti, every night felt inevitable. This is how 2000 Shaq turned gravity into a weapon.
And then you run into Akeem and them in the finals.
That was my fault we lost, because as a leader, I didn't lead. After we beat the Bulls, I let up. We had 8 days off. Me and D. Scott were doing stuff we weren't supposed to do.
Discipline replaced excuses, and everything moved. Shaq entered camp at 345 pounds of real power, not indulgence, after Phil set a clear target and demanded 40 minutes of force. Years of coasting ended the day he stared at Jackson's rings and heard a simple promise: listen and you will get one. He did more than listen. He changed eating, training, sleep, and intent, bringing a lighter step and a meaner purpose that lasted through fourth quarters. Film from that fall shows quicker seals, cleaner pivots, and a second jump that had vanished. Teammates felt it in practice when post battles became tutorials. Opponents felt it when doubles came late and the rim sounded different. The routine was boring by design, which is why it worked. Discipline made the league feel small.
For Shaquille O'Neal to be as big as he is and carry that load, Shaq has some impeccable footwork. Shaq wasn't trying to finesse. He got to a spot and he was just like, called us.
The triangle did not hide him. It weaponized him. Jackson installed a read and react engine that punished ball watching and rewarded timing. For Shaq, that meant brutal simplicity. Seal early, catch clean, kick on the double, repost before the help reset. Kobe wanted touches. Phil wanted flow. A wrist injury removed friction, and second units learned the pattern cold. 5 players touched the same idea, so entry passes arrived on time and cutters flashed open like clockwork. Defenses had to pick a poison they could not survive. One-on-one was a layup. A late double was 3 free throws spread across a quarter. An early double was a corner 3. When Bryant returned, the standard held because results are persuasive. Possessions began with a post, pivoted to a pass, and returned to a hook that felt inevitable. Even misses were design features, because putbacks arrived before weak side bodies could land from their fake contests. Structure turned size into checkmate. Footwork made the giant feel unfair. Fans remember shattered rims, but coaches remember angles, leverage, and the black tornado. The spin flicked pressure into daylight, turning a defender's lean into a runway for a soft finish. He paired it with jump hooks off either shoulder and short turnarounds that arrived before help could form. He did not need Hakeem's full library because he owned a sprinter's first step inside a center's frame. Catch deep, and it was over. Catch mid-post, and it became arithmetic. 1 bump, 1 pivot, 2 points, whistle optional. When he did miss, the ball often returned to his hands because he moved opponents, then the glass. Tape from that year shows the same pattern repeated across arenas. Seal, feel the pressure, vanish the space, lift, and land with the score. The magic was economy. No wasted fakes, no dribbles, just a short path from balance to elevation, which multiplied fourth quarter damage. Footwork, not force alone, built the avalanche. Defense turned respect into fear. The weight drop unlocked second jumps, shorter closeouts, and sharper tags. Early season film shows a different animal. Swats at the square, late drives redirected into floaters, and a lane that felt members only. The block numbers spiked, but the bigger change was timing on help, verticality at the rim, and fewer slow recoveries that bleed corners. Teammates trusted the back line, so perimeter pressure tightened without panic. Opponents felt their options shrink by the dribble, which forced bad 2s and bailout 3s. The Lakers rose from 23rd in defense to the league's best, and the paint turned into a toll road with no free passage. Even when he did not get a hand on the ball, his presence edited shot charts, erasing layups and converting drives into reluctant pull-ups. Coaches diagrammed solutions on whiteboards, then watched their guards pick up the dribble at 8 feet because the air changed. He guarded the rim and the mood. Tension almost cracked the room before it crowned them. Kobe's obsession collided with the triangle's ego tax, and Glenn Rice freelanced for touches. A January skid, a Spurs beating, and trade whispers turned practices into politics. The reset was not a meeting. It was a throttling of Utah. 4 first-quarter blocks by Shaq, perimeter heat from Kobe, and a 46-point hammer that changed temperature. From there came 19 straight wins, with opponents held under 100 in all but 3. The margin a steady drumbeat. Inside the streak, the roles hardened. The post was the hub, cuts were currency, and the clock belonged to the defense. Winning solved what talking could not, because film makes the most persuasive argument. By the time February closed, the locker room did not need harmony to function. It needed habits. And every night those habits produced a suffocating script that wore out opponents by the third quarter. Crisis forged compliance, and compliance built momentum. 61 on his birthday sounded like a myth until it happened. March 6 against the Clippers. The rim was regulation and everything else looked undersized. Shaq went 24 of 35 with 23 rebounds, steals, spin finishes, and soft catches that turned into loud dunks. No threes, no empty calories, just post touches that stacked whistles and wilted legs. It stood as the final 60 without a 3 for decades. A museum piece of interior dominance in a league drifting outward. Watch the tape and you hear it more than see it. The thud of position gained, the groan of help arriving late, the net snapping as bodies bounce. Teammates stopped calling plays and started feeding a fire. Coaches from the other bench cycled options and burned timeouts that changed nothing, because every coverage ended with the same math at the rim. Birthdays usually bring cake. This one brought a clinic and a warning to scouts who still believed fatigue would slow him. That night, the box score felt too small. The numbers were loud, but the context screamed. 29.7 points, 13.6 rebounds, 3.0 blocks, and 3.8 assists on the league's best efficiency while driving a 67-win machine with the top defense. His screens erased guards, his seals erased schemes, and his passes created rhythm threes on schedule. He did not chase stats. He chased control. The MVP should have been unanimous, but one ballot wandered elsewhere, and history kept an asterisk. It did not slow the march. It clarified the mission. June would be the only courtroom that mattered, and every scouting report began with a plea for early help that never arrived on time. Context also means cost to the opponent. Centers picked up fouls early, backups played scared, and wings who cheated down surrendered kickouts that punished greed. By spring, coaches talked about survival segments, trying to win the non-Shaq minutes and endure the rest. Awards decorated it. Pressure defined it. Sacramento swung hard, and Shaq answered harder. The Kings dragged the series to a deciding fifth when round one still ran short, riding pace and chaos to tilt the floor. With the season on a thread, Shaq stacked 32 points, 18 boards, 4 dimes, and 3 blocks to end the noise. The message traveled to Phoenix in round 2. Against the Suns, he averaged 30 and 16 across 5, a gentleman's sweep that felt more inevitable than polite. Touches were consistent, and outcomes became routine. The attacks looked different, but the math never changed. Paint points, free throws, and shooters eaten off doubles. Sacramento's best hope was to turn games into sprints and bait early fouls, but deep seals forced half-court honesty. Phoenix tried to stretch him with pace and mid-range jumpers, yet every miss became a runway rebound that restarted the interior cycle. Schemes varied, consequences did not. Pressure brought order, and order brought exits. Portland tried depth, math, and patience and nearly stole it. Pippen directed traffic, Sheed threw length at the post, and Sabonis offered a 7-3 brain with elbows. Game 1 belonged to Shaq entirely. Game 2 was a 29-point rebuttal from the Blazers inside Staples. At halftime of Game 3, Phil snapped at Shaq for passivity, and the second half tilted on command. Games 5 and 6 dragged everything to the brink as LA unraveled while Portland smelled blood. Game 7 began ugly, then worse. The series had no glamour, only collisions and stubbornness, the kind that exposes comfort. Sabonis fronted, shaded, and hacked, yet every whistle moved the clock toward a moment where single coverage would be unavoidable. When that moment arrived, spacing returned. Kobe found creases, and Shaq's touches regained depth. Portland's plan was coherent, but it required perfection over 7 games, and perfection does not survive contact. Depth blinked when force met resolve, the comeback that saved a dynasty before it existed. Down 15 with 10 minutes left, LA needed stops, whistles, and a door to the paint. Sabonis picked up his 5th, the post reopened, and the ball finally hit deep pockets with time to act. Portland's jumpers rimmed, Kobe attacked air pockets, and then the lob carved itself into franchise lore. That dunk was more than 2 points. It was a promise to June. Shaq's line looked modest by his standard, but his gravity fed every crucial run and every late closeout. When the horn sounded, relief felt like prophecy. The fourth quarter became a clinic in patience. Deep seals, kickouts, then reposts that forced Portland to choose between surrendering layups or surrendering rhythm threes. They chose both by accident, because panic scrambles legs. The score swung, the building tilted, and a seasoned moments from the edge found a staircase instead of a cliff. Indiana brought grit. Shaq brought inevitability. The first 2 his staples were demolition. 43-19, then 40-24. Stat lines that end debates before they start. Kobe's ankle absence tilted Game 3, and Game 4 demanded overtime heroics that he supplied on one good foot. The Pacers fought. They were not built for this. Foul trouble stacked like chairs, rotation sagged, and the backboard seemed to lean when Shaq sealed. Even his misses produced points, because 3 bodies on a box out leave a corner shooter grinning. By Game 6, the pattern was cruel and simple. Indiana tried bigger bodies, quicker doubles, and late scrambles. None of it changed the math. When they sent help early, cut is 8. When they waited, the hook arrived. When they hacked, the bonus did the damage. Every choice carried a bill, and the due date came by halftime. The series moved downhill. Gravity never took a playoff. Some mismatches are not tactical. They are geological. Game 6 sealed the year and the argument. With 41-12, Shaq closed the book while it was still being written, and Kobe leapt into his arms as confetti replaced anxiety. Across the series, he averaged 38 and 16.7 at 61% and still swallowed space on defense. The performance outlived the broadcast because it satisfied every lens. Numbers, tape, and the feeling in an opponent's huddle. Finals MVP was not a trophy. It was a scale that broke. The celebration mattered because the process had been public. America watched a superstar exchange charm for chores and turn conditioning into cruelty. The best part was the simplicity. Possessions kept starting the same way and kept ending the same way, which is the rarest thing in June. Nothing exotic. Just repetition an opponent could predict and still could not stop, which is the purest definition of dominance. The game plan had no secrets, only certainty. Finals MVP was not an award. It was a measurement. The playoff ledger reads like fiction until you check every box. 30.7 per night with 15.4 boards, 3.1 assists, 2.4 blocks, and only 2.4 turnovers while absorbing traps and hacks. He was doubled on the catch, tripled on the bounce, and still lived near 60% true efficiency. Fouls drawn put LA in the bonus so often that fourth quarter started with free points. Every possession carried a tax. Every tax funded a run. The pressure did not spike. It simmered for 23 games, wearing out legs, voices, and plans. By the last whistle, opponents did not argue the verdict. They tried to forget the feeling. The beauty of that line is in its balance. High volume without chaos, rim attempts without waste, and passing that arrived on time enough to keep shooters honest. He was not padding. He was rationing force across weeks, saving the cruelest minutes for when crowds got loud and rotations got tight. Sustained strain is what breaks series. Strategy against him was not complex. It was desperate. Teams wrapped, grabbed, and pointed to the stripe. Hack tactics slowed tempo and inflated attempts, but they also gifted LA to bonus and tilted whistles. Big sat early. Help arrived late. Shooters stepped into rhythm because defenders were a half step cautious. Shaq did not need to turn into a knockdown free throw shooter to win the math. He only needed volume and patience. By the fourth, the ledger leaned his way and the scoreboard followed the ledger. Coaches knew this and still returned to fouls because there was nothing left to draw. The hidden effect was psychological. Defenders who burned 2 fouls in 5 minutes stopped contesting with full commitment, which turned post entries into clinics and drives into uncontested floaters. Crowds hated the pace, but the Lakers loved the math, and the series clock ticked in their favor. When the rule book becomes a shield, you are already losing. Compare eras and the conclusion stays stubborn. Modern spacing would widen passing lanes and give reposts a head start. Switches would collapse. Small ball would require emergency bigs, and 5-out would become 4-out with a panic cutter. Add today's nutrition, recovery tech, and shooting labs to a 2000 motor, and possessions would end at the rim or the stripe. Front offices would sign fouls like relievers to reach halftime. You can scheme pick and roll. You cannot scheme mass with timing or elbows that claim space by right. The comparison is not nostalgia, it's geometry. A deep catch at the dotted line forces a double from the nail, which opens a corner, which opens a cut, which turns help into a carousel without exit. Analytics would love him, since free throws, layups, and corner threes are the gospel. He manufactures all three by standing right and moving one defender a foot backward. Prime Shaq today would feel like a patch that breaks the game. Teammates changed, but his gravitational constant did not. Kobe had crescendos. Role players rotated. Phil enforced calm. The paint was the fixed star. Every game opened with a simple test. Who absorbs the first seal? By the second quarter, plans bent. By the fourth, they broke. This reliability was the hidden stat of 2000. You could schedule it like sunrise, and opponents lived by weather reports that always predicted storms in the lane. The rhythm of the year was not drama. It was repetition, which is how dynasties begin. Guards knew where to cut because the double would come from the same shoulder. Shooters knew when to lift because the help on the repost always arrived a beat late. Even timeouts felt predictable. Coaches begged for fronts, for digs, for late switches, and the next trip looked identical anyway. Predictable is a compliment when the result is pain. Availability of pressure is the most valuable skill in basketball. Reputation often trails reality by months. Early critics called him spoiled and unserious. Spring corrected the file. The diet tightened, the cardio showed, the defensive reads sharpened, and the late-game stamina erased old jokes. He still filmed ads. He still smiled. He just buried teams between the punchlines. Kareem, Walton, and even internal skeptics watched the tape and adjusted their tones because outcomes disrespect opinions. The season did not sanitize his personality. It proved the work. Fans learned it in phases. First, the body looked different. Then the rotations looked quicker. Then the fourth quarters stopped feeling risky. When June ended, the narrative could not survive the evidence. You can dislike the commercials and still respect the hammer. In 2000, the league learned to do both at once, which is how legends become inevitable, not just likable. Results always win the argument when the tape agrees. The season did not redeem him. It revealed him. What made the year immortal was its inevitability. It was not a hot streak or a lucky bracket. It was control from October to June. Every opponent arrived with a plan and left with a bruise. The fear was rational. One deep catch could swing tempo, foul counts, and psychology before a timeout could intervene. Fans remember the lob. Coaches remember the silence after a third foul on their only big. The tape shows resignation creeping in by the second quarter. Eyes glancing at benches for help that was not walking through the door. Inevitability is rare. He had it nightly. You can chart the sets, count the doubles, and diagram the counters. But the ending does not change because the premise does not change. Paint pressure compounded over minutes, then games, then series play, until even made shots felt brief. Hope needs stops. 2000 Shaq rationed them out like favors and collected them back with interest. Inevitability is the rarest skill. He had it every night. Dominance is not a highlight. It's a habit that suffocates hope. Shaq's 2000 run was a perfect storm of conditioning, system, and sheer physics. He bent defenses, broke records, and gave the Lakers a blueprint for a dynasty. If he played today, teams would stockpile bigs, hack strategically, and still watch the paint collapse. The season was more than numbers. It was inevitability. Watch any quarter from that year, and you can feel the floor tilt. That's why 2000 Shaq still defines what unstoppable really means.